Every time I mention Uber Comfort, drivers ask me, should I upgrade my car just to get comfort rides? And I'm going to be real with you. If your car already qualifies, comfort can absolutely burst your per trip earnings. If you're thinking about buying a car just to get comfort, that is where the math usually falls apart. Let's break down what the data actually says about comfort trips, longer trips, and per trip pay. And then I'll show you why. If you're going to upgrade, you should be aiming for XL and Black first and treating comfort as a bonus that comes with it. Uber Comfort sits above standard Uber X and below Uber Black. Riders pay more because they expect a more comfortable, newer vehicle and specific in-car experience, like a clean interior, a smoother ride, and more control over things like temperature and conversation. Now, vehicle requirements, they vary by market and by model. But in most places, your car needs to be roughly 7 years newer to qualify for comfort. And that's with Uber and with Lyft. It usually has to be a mid-size or a larger vehicle with a nicer trim level than a base Uber X vehicle. That can shift a bit based on your city and what's on Uber's approved list. But the theme is newer, more comfortable, and more spacious. And when you accept comfort requests, you're opting into those higher expectations. Riders, they're choosing comfort because they want that upgraded experience. They want a cleaner interior. They want the ability to set the temperature how they like it. And they want the option to indicate whether they want a quiet ride or they want a conversation. That's what really separates UberX from comfort. Now, let's talk money, because the Gridwise data shows that premium rides like Comfort, XL, and Lux typically tip around 9 to 10% of the fare, and standard UberX tips are closer to 6 to 8%. And the reason is basically the same as in a restaurant. The higher the bill, the higher the tip. Because most people, they think in percentages. 10%, 15%, and 20%. Comfort rides cost more than UberX, so even if the rider taps that same percentage, the actual dollar amount is bigger. UberX is cheaper, so the tip is cheaper because the bill is smaller. When you stack that on top of Comfort's higher base fare, your per trip earnings on Comfort usually come out ahead of standard UberX. Now, premium tiers, including Comfort, they consistently earn more per ride than standard UberX, especially once you factor in tips. Now, from my own driving, Comfort used to feel like a huge jump over UberX. In 2026, it's still better per trip, but it's not as good as it used to be. Some Comfort rides will get close to $1 per mile, but a lot of regular UberX rides, they can land in the same ballpark, but only when you catch the right surge. Now here's where Comfort quietly shines, and that's longer rides. Gridwise's 2026 report shows that trips of 12 miles or more are only about 20% of rideshare volume, but they make up around 40% of your total pay. So longer trips, they're carrying way more of your earnings than the share of your trip count. Now premium riders, the ones that pick Comfort, XL, and Lux, they tend to use that service more for those longer distances, like airport runs, business travel, and out-of-city trips. That skew toward bigger fares is a real structural advantage for Comfort drivers. Now, on top of that, XL and other premium tiers saw some of the sharpest price per mile gains year over year. One Gridwise data point is that XL's price per mile rose to the mid 40% range from 2024 to 2025. And Black SUV, Black, Lux, and other top tiers are still getting the highest per mile categories. Now Comfort rides, they still sit in that premium cluster, above standard UberX, but below true luxury. Now, more of your trips being longer also means fewer trips per hour, but more revenue per trip. You're trading volume for per trip size. That trade-off usually works in your favor when the base rate and the tip percentage are both higher, like they are on Comfort and XL. For me, when I was driving more Comfort, that's when I noticed my average trip length on Comfort skewed longer than my average UberX ride. And those airport and hotel runs help smooth out the slower parts of my week. Now, let's get into the part that most drivers skip, and that's the car math. The big question is not, does Comfort pay more per ride? It does. The real question is Comfort worth upgrading your vehicle for? Comfort trips are less frequent than standard UberX in most markets. You're trading some request volume for better trip quality. If you already own a Comfort-eligible vehicle, the trade is usually a no-brainer. The vehicle cost is sunk, so the higher per-trip earnings and better tips are usually basically free upside. Now let's talk about the part that most drivers get wrong, and that's buying a car for comfort. Comfort trips are less frequent than standard UberX in most markets, but the bigger issue isn't just how many requests you get, it's how much more you're actually getting paid for those miles. Comfort rides do pay more per trip and tip more, but in 2026, that bump is usually modest. On a lot of runs, you're only getting a little bit more than UberX on a per mile basis, not in a totally different pay bracket. If your current car already qualifies for Comfort, turning it on makes sense. Your vehicle cost is already baked in, and that slightly higher base rate plus better tips are basically free upside for doing what you're already doing, as long as you keep that car and the rider experience to Comfort standards. Now, where it doesn't make sense is buying or financing a newer car just to get Comfort. You're taking on a bigger payment and higher maintenance for a tier that in many markets pays only a bit more per mile than UberX. You might see some rides get close to $1 per mile, but a lot of UberX trips live in that same neighborhood when you factor in surges and promos. That small difference usually doesn't justify a whole new car. If you're going to spend money on a vehicle upgrade, the target should be XL or Black, something that unlocks higher tiers where the pay per mile jumps meaningfully. With the right vehicle, you get Comfort as a bonus lane, but you also have access to XL, Premier, and Black, and other premium categories that actually move your earnings into a different range. So the simple rule is this: if you already qualify for Comfort, use it and capture that extra pay per trip and tips. If you don't qualify, don't buy a car for Comfort. If you upgrade, do it for XL, Black, or Premier. Comfort comes along with the ride. Here's the honest breakdown. Comfort pays better per trip and tips significantly more than UberX. The Gridwise premium tip data backs that up nationally, and most drivers who qualify will see more improvement in their average per trip earnings. Now, whether Comfort is worth it comes down to these two questions. The first one is, what are you already driving? If your current car meets Comfort requirements, turning Comfort on is almost always worth a shot. The vehicle cost is already baked in, so those better per trip numbers are extra money for doing what you're already doing, plus keeping your car and your service to that slightly higher standard. And two, what does Comfort demand look like in your market? If you only see a handful of Comfort pings in a week, upgrading just for that tier is going to feel disappointing. If you're in a business-heavy or an airport-heavy city where premium riders are common, those longer Comfort and XL trips can anchor your entire shift. So my take on this is, if you already qualify and you're not running Comfort, the data suggests you're probably leaving real money on the table. If you're debating buying a car specifically for Comfort, the 2026 numbers say that usually not a smart move. Aim for XL or Black, and you're going to take on a bigger payment and let Comfort be the extra earning lane that comes with that upgrade. And if you want to see how this actually looks in your numbers, what Comfort does to your per trip pay, your hourly rate, and your real per mile, track your earnings and your mileage with the Gridwise app. It pulls in your Uber and Lyft data and it shows you what you're making. Makes it a lot easier to decide whether Comfort is worth it in your market.